Metal sculptor Adrian Mokes was commissioned by North West Leicestershire District Council to create a piece of public art for the cultural quarter of Ashby De La Zouch. His design concept was to create a series of tall, elegant curved columns whose appearance changes as you walk around the site. From two distinctive viewpoints, the shapes will magically form the image of a large, majestic tree, reflecting Ashby's position in the heart of the National Forest. During the summer of 2018, Adrian hosted several Meet the Artist sessions in the town so that local people could see and understand his plans. He also ran workshops in local primary and secondary schools where he asked children to study the natural forms of leaves and trees and create their own artwork using metal wire. Their ideas will be combined into a separate artwork designed by Adrian, which will be installed in front of the Hood Park gates later in 2019. From his studio in Manchester, Adrian takes us through the various stages of fabrication and special techniques he developed in order to create the main sculpture.
The first stage of the fabrication was to work with a company in North Manchester who specialise in bending gigantic pieces of steel. They've taken this structural steel tubing and bent it to a very specific technical design that I produced for them. And then from there it was delivered to a blacksmith and fabrication engineer in Stockport, a lovely little family firm that I've worked with for over 20 years, who then assembled all the pieces together very carefully. They have an expert welder who works for them. From there it was then carefully lifted onto a lorry and sort of fading light one afternoon and taken to the galvanisers, another place 25 miles away near Rochdale, where it basically they dip it in acid first of all to clean it, and then they take it into a tank of molten zinc and they coat the steel, and it's by far the best process for the longevity of the surface. It'll outlast us by about 90 years plus. And then I collected it from there using a haulier that I've also been using for donkey's years, and then we carefully craned it into the studio from the road, and here we are today. Okay, so here we are with the sculpture. It's actually taken me by surprise, the size of it, from looking at the little model in the schools to actually having it here now. It's enormous. I've had to build an extension on the back of the studio, and this is all set up now, ready for fettling, and it means actually preparing the galvanised surface for a special treatment. Okay, so we've got the massive 8 columns here, and what I'm doing is I'm actually fettling them all, ready to do a special surface technique. And fettling is a good old Yorkshire word which means preparing to do something else. So these will all be in fine fettle when I've finished, and it's a matter of sanding them, getting rid of rough bits, and basically preparing them with a special technique I've developed. When the big columns come back from the galvanisers, there's often lots of lines of sharp zinc where it's pulled underneath the tubing. So I have to very carefully go over it, both with the sander and with a hand file as well, so that you make sure that there's no rough areas or sharp areas. So when I've actually had to sand lines into it, this is what gave me the idea to then actually deliberately sand more lines into it, which add to the effect of the bark that I'm trying to create. The string on the large column you're looking at now is actually part of the new technique I've developed, because I'm using it to both soak up the phosphoric acid to make dark lines, but also to act as a resist so that you see clear areas. Now, part of the process that I'm doing with the fettling of the artwork is to prepare them for this special technique, which involves actually applying very dilute phosphoric acid to the zinc surface, and it basically gives an instant aging effect. And I had these test tubes made at the galvanisers so that I could experiment with them before I actually tackled the main large columns. And what I've done is with the sanded lines you get effects of different sort of patinas and different reflections of them. And I've also, thinking of the children I work with in the schools last year, I've also cut out lots of little stamps from sponge to actually put 6 different leaves on each of the columns, so that the children especially will be able to relate them to the work that we did in the schools. This is one of the leaf stamps that I've made out of sponge, and it's actually soaking in the phosphoric acid, which is a very, very dilute mix with water, and it's quite safe. It doesn't burn or anything like that, and when it's on the zinc it's quite benign. It doesn't sort of float off into the atmosphere like you might do with old paint, for instance, which is one of the reasons why I like it and why I've sort of developed this technique. So what I'm doing is I'm just making sure there's some of the acid on there, and I've chosen a place where it's actually quite a nice height for children to see it. I'm about 3 or 4 feet up from the bottom, and so basically I'm just... Now, one of the things that the string does is it catches any drips as well, so that when the string soaks up the phosphoric acid, it starts forming the black lines that you've seen. Now let's see how well that's done. Can you see that? And then obviously there's little drips there, which I think I will just let those do what they want. I'm also spraying a very mild tea wash onto the surfaces very carefully, making sure that it goes in between the string patterns that I've made, and giving it an overall, occasionally giving it an overall sort of mist. Looking at the column that I've already patterned, you can see how the lines are actually meant to signify or echo different types of bark, particularly thinking of something like a silver birch bark, which is very varied and interesting. So it's all sort of interlinking, and hopefully it'll create this extra layer of interest which I like to build into the sculptures, where not only do you get a gigantic sculpture that is quite an impressive landmark from a distance, but I'm very interested in drawing people closer so that they can inspect the fine detail of something, and there's an extra element to it to discover. I love the sort of systems and structures in nature. I find it very inspiring. A lot of the sculptures I've done in the past have reflected this sort of interest, and this one's like the latest development. So this process I've developed is actually unique, something I started using about 8 years ago, and I've sort of developed this new technique, particularly for the sculpture in Ashby.